The bottom line is, the situation that we are now in, that President Trump has put us in, is way better than the position we were in 8 days ago. The tariffs on China remain, and that is going to be the big sort of push down on the economy in the near future. Now, that may be pain that is worthy of going through. I've been an advocate of tariffing the living hell out of China for as long as I can remember. I've said for years, I'm not even sure it was good policy in the 1970s for Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon to open China. Maybe we should have just let them collapse from within instead of ushering them into the global trading system with the bizarre hope that this was somehow going to moderate their politics. Instead, they have retained all of their authoritarianism, but they've also gained enormous amounts of global economic power. With that said, the shock and awe of the tariffs that President Trump is putting on, those will have ramifications, there's no question. The pre-markets were down fairly significantly because the reality is that 10% across the board tariffs are staying, which will in fact lead to some level of inflation, not remotely the kind of thing that was going to happen if President Trump had been putting 40 or 50% tariffs on a wide variety of inputs and goods from other countries, but it will lead to a global economic slowdown of some effect. Meanwhile, the markets are trying to price in what it means that we are slamming the door on China's fingers really, really, really hard. So, Scott Bessant, he's going after China hard. Again, I'm all in on this. I think this is good. I think we should be going after China hard. The question is going to be the sort of approach that is being taken. Is this a negotiating tactic? What is the off-ramp with China, if there is one? Because there are risks that attend on upping the ante with China in this sort of dramatic, non-escalatory fashion, just kind of like ramping up to 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds. Here's Scott Bessant going after China yesterday.
But in terms of escalation, unfortunately, the biggest offender in the global trading system is China. And they're the only country who's escalated. And I can tell the rest of the world that I'm not sure whether it was the prime minister or the economic minister in Spain made some comments this morning. Oh, well, maybe we should align ourselves more with China. That would be cutting your own throat.
Okay, so Bessant, again, is basically saying choose China or choose us. And then he says, we will keep slapping China. This is yesterday after the U-turn and reversal by President Trump.
As I said a week ago today, don't retaliate, hold your ground, let's see what happens. And China, they kept escalating, and now they have 125% tariffs that will be effective immediately.
Okay, then he continued along these lines. He says, listen, China can hurt us, but we're going to hurt them more in a trade war, which is true, actually.
In terms of certainty, we will see what China does, but what I'm certain of is that what China is doing will affect their economy much more than it will ours, because they have an export-driven, flood the world with cheap export models, and the rest of the world now understands, because when we put up our tariff wall, those exports were already flowing to the rest of the G7 and to the global south.
Okay, so he's pointing out here that, again, we do an enormous amount of trade with Europe. We do an enormous amount of trade with the global south. Now, there are countries that trade much more with China than they trade with us. Japan is one of those countries, for example. Kind of approximately the same percentage of Japan's export market goes to the United States as goes to China. They import significantly more from China, Japan does, than they import from the United States, for example. However, there is, in fact, bipartisan consensus that China cheats. And they do. They steal intellectual property. They make it impossible to do actual, solid, honest business in their country. If you contravene their belief system, they will shut down your business and, in some cases, just steal your property. Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin, no ally of the president, she was out there stumping against China yesterday on CNN.
I believe that China cheats, that the government there subsidizes industry, which creates an unlevel playing field for Wisconsin workers. You know, Wisconsin is a state that makes things. We're a big manufacturing state. But when you have an unlevel playing field, you see the results. We lose jobs. We see China being able to undercut and underprice. We see steel dumping, aluminum dumping. And I think it's absolutely appropriate to have targeted tariffs or countervailing duties when China cheats.
That old mattress that I used to have, the one that I got from the big box store, you sleep on it, and then you realize after you have a better mattress just how bad the old one was. My new mattress from Helix is great. The old one was just terrible. You know that feeling where you wake up and your back is already complaining at you? That was me with the old mattress. Don't even get me started on how it turned into a heat trap at night. Since switching to Helix, I wake up feeling ready to take on even my busiest of days. And here's what makes Helix different. They don't believe in one-size-fits-all sleep solutions. Instead, they use their sleep quiz to match you with a custom mattress based on your body type and sleep preferences. Whether you sleep hot, need extra support for your back, or you share a bed with a restless partner, Helix has a perfect match for you. Tons of benefits to the Helix mattress, including the fact that mine is firm but breathable, which means I'm sleeping better. Helix is offering right now an incredible deal with their spring savings event. Visit helixsleep.com/Ben. Get 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/Ben for 20% off site-wide. Find your perfect mattress. Start sleeping better tonight. Again, just visit helixsleep.com/Ben for this exclusive offer. That's helixsleep.com/Ben to get 20% off site-wide. Again, there's bipartisan consensus for this. So what actually is going to happen next? And this is one of the big questions. And this, again, is why the market is roiled. Because China does have tools it can use against the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, the escalating trade conflict between the United States and China has reignited fears that Beijing could use financial markets to hit back at Washington. China is one of the largest overseas owners of U.S. government debt. There have long been fears that China could dump U.S. treasuries that make up a large chunk of its foreign exchange reserves. China owned about $1.2 trillion in U.S. Treasury securities in January. But they might be able to actually own more because they have third parties that are buying them and all the rest. U.S. government data showed China owned about $761 billion of treasuries as of January, trailing only Japan. That data covers treasuries held by both the government and private investors. Some have speculated about whether China was behind this week's treasury sell-off. Goldman Sachs said that they were skeptical of that, but China could also use its currency. They could devalue the yuan to help offset the impact of tariffs. The yuan's value is tightly controlled by the central bank. Investors have watched the daily fix. They could be subsidizing their domestic industries. There's a bunch of stuff that China could try to do. All of it would hurt China. The real question is there an off-ramp here for China that forces them to, for example, abide by IP regulations? Is there some sort of goal that the United States is attempting to implement with regard to China? Can we isolate China without actually provoking them into doing the biggest thing, which would be blockading Taiwan? So one of the things that we do have to watch out for with regard to China is, let's say we go to 125% tariffs, which we have on China, and let's say we maintain those. And let's say everything goes swimmingly, the way that I would want it to go. We sign zero tariff agreements with Vietnam, with Japan, with South Korea. We sign zero tariff agreements with the EU. Suddenly, you basically have a free world trading system that excludes China. And we start using the levers of financial power against China in the world markets in a much more severe way. And China becomes more and more isolated. Well, then you do run the risk that China at some point will attempt to blockade Taiwan as a negotiating chip against the rest of the world economy. Because they figure if they're in serious trouble anyway, they may as well threaten to melt down the entire global economy by basically destroying the semiconductor industry. And that's something that China very well could do, which is one of the reasons why you need a simultaneous military buildup and a stronger position in the Indo-Pacific region. It's actually quite important. I assume that's one of the reasons why the Trump administration is also pushing on the budget for a $1 trillion Pentagon budget, more shipbuilding and all the rest. If you're going to box in China, you got to box them in along every line, not just some lines. It's also one of the reasons, by the way, why some people who are even China hawks have suggested that going directly to 125% tariff on China, it would be better to go a little bit slower and sort of boil the frog more slowly. Go to 20% tariffs, then go to 40% tariffs. Allow people to reshore, gradually tighten the noose around China, and make it so that it buys us some time to actually up our game in the South China Sea, in the Taiwan Straits, before China tries to melt everything down if they feel too much pressure. I mean, all this is complex. The bottom line is that the situation that we are now in, that President Trump has put us in, is way better than the position we were in 8 days ago when the President of the United States was announcing Liberation Day. The markets, again, are nervous. I understand the nervousness of the markets. Not clear what's going to happen with the trade deal. It's not going to clear what happened. Like, do these 10% blanket tariffs go away at any point? What is the purpose of a 10% blanket? Is that an emergency tariff? That's still a very, very large tariff. It's just not nearly as large as the tariffs that were going to be put on a moment ago. That's why the markets are still hovering below where they were before President Trump announced the Liberation Day stuff. So yeah, there's a big recovery yesterday, and there's a bit of a sell-off today. We're not back to where we were before because, again, nervousness in the markets. When you talk to investor types, they don't know what's coming down the pike. There's too much uncertainty in the markets. The next step for the Trump administration is to establish that certainty. The next step for the Trump administration, start announcing trade deals like tomorrow. He announced a 90-day postponement. Get some good trade deals. Explain how the tariffs on China are going to be implemented, what the future looks like. Right? That now you're all on the same page. Right now you have an administration where presumably you don't have internal battles and everybody is aimed in the same direction. The president has shifted course, which is a very good thing. Now let's hear the entire spell out, the entire rollout, and then you'll see a much more solid stock market, a much more sanguine investment community. Well, that's all for now, folks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts down below. Be sure to check out all of the other great content on my channel. I'll see you here next time.